Welcome to Literary AF Podcast.
Hi, welcome to Literary AF Podcast. My name is Sheldon.
I'm Danni.
I'm Arlene.
And we're here today to talk to you about books.
One book in particular this time.
Just one book.
Singular book.
But in some ways, it's just one book, yeah.
It was like reading 3 books.
I didn't find it that long. I don't know.
It's not long.
I haven't read this book in a long time, but we all have varying opinions on this one. It's called
The Picture of Dorian Gray
by
Oscar Wilde.
And
That's
It's
all?
a book?
I don't know. It's hoping maybe something funny. Well, some say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, but to Dorian Gray, picture is worth his life.
His eternal soul.
If you guys want to use that as a tagline on the book, you can just pay me royalties. Just email me the money directly. So we're going to go through this and talk. That's how podcasts work.
We do talk. Yes.
And hope we live. This one was intense.
I loved it. No, I didn't love it. 4 out of 5 liked it.
I would have had to throw down if you said you loved it.
I loved it.
Almost want to, out of being a contrarian.
I will fight you both.
Oliver Wilde, though, is like a classic.
Oliver Wilde?
What's his name?
Oscar Wilde.
Yeah, Oliver Wilde.
Who did not write Oliver Twist?
Like the hot dogs. Oscar Mayer?
Oliver Meyer is the hot guy. Okay, we're going to way sidetrack. Alright, let's get into this book.
Dorian Gray. What's the plot summary for Dorian
In the
Gray?
stately London home of his aunt, the well-known artist Basil Hallward meets Dorian Gray. Dorian is a cultured, wealthy, and impossibly beautiful young man who immediately captured Basil's artistic imagination. I do know how to read. Dorian sits for several portraits, and Basil often depicts him as an ancient Greek hero or mythological figure. When the novel opens, the artist is completing his first portrait of Dorian as he truly is, but as he admits to his friend Lord Henry Wotton...
Boo.
Oh, Lord Henry.
Give him a chance.
The painting disappoints him because it reveals too much of his feeling for the subject. Lord Henry, a famous wit...
That's him, all right.
He enjoys scandalizing his friends by celebrating youth, beauty, and the selfish pursuit of pleasure, not pressure.
Pressure.
Selfish pursuit of pressure. Disagrees, claiming that the portrait is Basil's masterpiece. Dorian arrives at the studio and Basil reluctantly introduces him to Lord Henry, who he fears will have a damaging influence on the impressionable young Dorian.
I wonder what happens.
Those are totally unfounded. Happy to say that Lord Henry is just a nice guy for the rest of the book.
Oh, yeah. Perfectly fine.
I'm quickly interrupt you here because at a certain point, Lord Henry didn't really do anything that awful. He said a bunch of stuff, and then Dorian did awful things. But
says so much stuff. My first experience with this book, page 5, is just an entire page and a half of Henry going, "Youth is great," and then repeat that line over and over and over again for a page and a half.
Also including such hot takes as being smart makes you less hot.
Yeah, if you get smart, you get
less
ugly.
Pretty.
Yep.
Yeah, being hot makes you stupid. And he's also beauty is a form of genius, which is the complete opposite of what he. Lord Henry, I think, just starts talking, and when
doesn't
he
know how to stop.
He finishes, he's just done.
He just.
I think Lord Henry is the devil, and Basil might be God.
Kind of. I actually wrote that down in here. There's kind of a real Eve in the garden with the devil's snake kind of vibe going on with Dorian and Lord Henry, but I don't think that Lord Henry was ever that malicious. I don't think he ever intended ill.
He doesn't intend ill, he's just stupid.
Yes.
And he's pompous, and he doesn't know how to stop talking, and he's my first problem with this book.
Yes.
Is Lord Henry. It just doesn't know how to stop.
I agree, and I'm also going to just quickly say that while I loved this book, I hated reading it. It was a very hard read just because of the things that happen and how they happen, it was challenging. And it was challenging because it made me angry and sad. And more than once, I slammed the book down and I just growled. It was very emotional. And that's why I loved it, is any book to me that can make me feel emotions so strong that I can't stop thinking about it for hours afterwards, to me, is awesome.
It's either awesome or awful.
Yeah.
When you feel those super strong emotions. Because I'm thinking, like, there are books that have made me so, like, angry and just, like, frustrated because, like, the author is, like, dumb or, like, really missing something that, like, should be obvious to all the characters, but all the characters are like, duh, I don't know. And I'm not saying that about this book, just in general.
I think that's different, though, because being angry about something that the author isn't doing versus being angry about something the characters are doing,
yeah,
consciously, I think that's kind of where the difference is for me. And I was more angry at what the characters were doing rather than Oscar doing his thing.
All right, well, so to carry on.
Yes, sorry about that.
Lord Henry upsets Dorian with a speech about the transient nature of beauty and youth.
For a page and a half. That's exactly what I was talking about. That speech. That speech is a page and a half.
Accurate.
It's what sets Dorian on his path.
Dory?
Dory.
No, I said Dorian. You guys are crazy.
We just call him Dory.
Good old Dory.
Worried that his most impressive characteristics are fading day by day, Dorian curses his portrait, which he believes will one day remind him of the beauty he will have lost. In a fit of distress, he pledges his soul if only the painting could bear the burden of age and infamy, allowing him to stay forever young. After Dorian's outbursts, Lord Henry reaffirms his desire to own the portrait. However, Basil insists that the portrait goes to Dorian. I don't want to read this word for word. I want to, like, paraphrase this.
Paraphrase it. It's for such a short book, it has a very twisty plot and a lot of things happen.
Well, Lord Henry invites Dorian out for a night at the opera, I believe.
Yeah, new hedonism.
And they go out, and Dorian makes plans to meet with Basil again the next day, and he ends up, like, blowing him off, I believe. And that's kind of, like, the first sign.
Yeah. Is that because he meets Sybil?
Yes.
No, not yet. That's just because he was
not.
hanging out with Lord Henry, and he blew off Basil. And then a couple weeks later, he meets Sybil, or he sees Sybil when he goes to a play.
Yeah.
She's playing Shakespearean ladies at a theater, and he just, like, falls in love with her instantly because she's beautiful. And Dorian Gray is a very superficial character.
Yeah.
So he sees her, he's instantly in love with her because she's beautiful, and she basically hung the moon. And he goes to see her in the show, like, because it's a rotating series of shows. She's in, like, Macbeth, and she's in Shakespeare, and she's in all of them. So he goes to see her, like, every night, even though he's just saw it, like, the day before, kind of thing.
And I think it's notable that at this point, he's blowing off Lord Henry.
Yes.
For Sybil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he doesn't like Sybil for Sybil.
No.
He likes Sybil because she can be different people.
She's beautiful, and she's young, and she's an actress.
Yeah, but, like, he specifically likes that she can portray different people.
Yeah. Because
when she decides to give up acting, he just blows her off. He, like, doesn't care anymore.
It's not even that she gives up acting. So, the Lord Henry goes to talk to Dorian and I guess ask him where he's been. And Dorian's like, I found this woman, I'm in love. You should come see her at the show tonight or something. And in the time that, like, he's like, you should come meet this lady that I love. And actually going to the show, he actually proposes to Sybil. Like, they agree to get married. She doesn't even actually know his full name. She just calls him Prince Charming, and that's, like, the only thing people know him as.
Yeah.
And so Lord Henry, Basil, and Dorian Gray go to the show to watch Sybil in the... I don't even remember what it was. Was it...
I think it was
Romeo and Juliet. She was playing Juliet. And she comes on stage, and she's just terrible. She's dull, and she's not putting anything into it, and it's embarrassing.
That's right.
And Henry and Basil leave. Dorian's like, no, just go. This is ridiculous. And in that moment, Dorian Gray immediately falls out of love with his fiancée.
Yeah.
And he goes to see her backstage after the show, and he's like, what happened? What is this? And she's like, well, now that I know what true love is like, you know, it's so much harder to portray it on stage with somebody else when I love you so much. And Dorian Gray's like, okay, we're over.
Yeah.
Because you can't act anymore.
Well,
and then he leaves.
Worst.
hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you're going to be able to play tragedies now, I think.
Yeah.
I like, though, that it did not miss me that you're never sure if Sybil was actually a good actress or not. Or whether it was Dorian just being like, oh, this woman, it's just, I liked something about this, so now it's amazing because Lord Henry has put into my head to feel everything I feel like 10 times what it actually is. So I like that in a way as well, and it was like him bringing his friends to see her almost like broke the spell.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I thought that was kind of
almost like
interesting.
It's almost like, when you like really like a movie or something.
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking.
And you try to show your friend, and then they don't like it at all, and you're like, oh.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't like
you
this movie.
watch this really funny video that I saw on YouTube, and you're busting a gut, and your friend is just like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, sitting there stone-faced. Like.
Yeah. I think that's exactly what happened. In a scene away from Dorian Gray, there's, before they break up, Sybil talks to her mother, and she tells her, I'm engaged to Prince Charming, we're going to be married, and we're in love, and it's going to be a happily ever after. And they tell her brother this, and her brother is leaving...
To be a sailor.
He's
going to go work.
Yeah, he's going to go be a sailor and do work. And, like, the only part her brother has in this entire scene is just to be like, if anything happens to you, I'm going to kill Dorian Gray. And everybody's like, oh, you can't say that. And then he leaves. That's it.
You guys know
the whole thing is just to set up that plot.
You know that reaction image of Mickey Mouse where he's like, that's a surprise tool that will help us later.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it's a bit of foreshadowing.
That may come back, in fact, later.
Yes.
So Dorian Gray breaks up with Sybil.
And then after he does that, he gets home and sees that his portrait's changed for the first time.
Yeah. It's got a slightly more malicious smile on it.
Yeah.
And he immediately starts freaking out. And
he covers it up. And
he puts like a folding screen in front of it.
But then he decides to try to make up with Sybil, right?
Yeah, that's the next morning. He wakes up, he's cleared his head, and he's like, it actually wasn't that bad. I'll go talk to Sybil, we can make things up. I'll talk to Lord Henry and explain or whatever. And then he spends all day, like, in bed thinking about this.
And writing her a letter.
And he writes her a letter. Yeah. And then Lord Henry comes in, and he's like, oh, terrible news. And he explains to Dorian Gray that Sybil has died. And that's... And Dorian Gray is like, oh, but I just wrote her this letter. Well, it doesn't matter now. But, what she did was she swallowed something?
Yeah, she killed herself.
She swallowed poison, basically.
Poison. And Lord Henry, when he comes in, he makes a big deal to Dorian after that, because Dorian kind of explains to him what he did, like he broke up with her, and he's like, oh, that's amazing, that's wonderful, I would love to have someone kill themselves over me, because that's just a beautiful expression of how much they truly loved you, that being without you made them want to die. And again, this is Lord Henry talking out his ass, which is essentially all he does, but his words affect Dorian and his perception so much that Dorian is like, oh, yeah, I guess that is pretty neat.
Yeah, the summary calls it, Lord Henry urges Dorian to consider it as a sort of artistic triumph, the personification of tragedy.
Yes. Dorian is sad for about, 2 hours, I think it says, basically.
Yep.
And then... Basil comes in, and he's like, oh, I heard about Sybil, I'm so sorry. And Dorian Gray is just like, yeah, it happened. He brushes it off. He's like, no, that happened, I'm going out later, so... And Basil's just like, are you serious? Like, your fiancée killed herself, she's dead. And Dorian is he just is like, oh, I'm going to the opera tonight, so, you know, I gotta get ready, kind of thing.
Yep. It's, it was wild.
Yep. And I think the picture changes with that. It, like, the lines darken around its mouth or something. Like, it gets worse.
Yeah, it gets worse. And it keeps getting worse, and I think at this point it kind of skims, as it kind of just goes into, and then Dorian Gray did a whole bunch of stuff that was amazing and also horrible.
Yeah, it time skips about, like 10 years or
well,
something.
Well, before it does that, like, according to the summary, it says, Lord Henry gives Dorian a book that describes the wicked exploits of a Frenchman.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it becomes Dorian's Bible as he sinks ever deeper into a life of sin and corruption. And it basically is like, then it skips ahead 18 years.
He buys a copy of that book in different colored bindings so that he can, like, depending on his mood, he can read it in a different color.
Yeah, he's just obsessed with this book.
That's funny.
And then, time skips, like, 10 years.
18, according
18 years, ah.
Yeah, a long time. And that's why it's
time.
so significant that Dorian, during that period, does not age.
Yeah.
He becomes, like, nobody seems to think it's weird either that this guy is, like, perpetually, 25
he's
or
20.
something?
He's, like, 20.
Yeah.
And he's 38, and he's still 20.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, I still have the looks of a handsome young man.
Youthful vigor.
No, but, I mean, like, there was, like, a belief back then where, like, you're aged by, like, your actions and, like, your moral, like, failings and stuff. Like, that's, like, a big part of this book and what happens to the portrait.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, so, you know, if someone had, like, youthful good looks when they were older, people would assume it's because they had lived a good life or because they were, like,
moral
still, like, a child at heart. And, still, like, moral.
Right.
So they were, and it's also, too, like, think of Les Mis. Jean Valjean, like, ages, like, 50 years in that one scene where he hears all the crimes being read out and, like, the wrong person's about to be put to death. And then Jean Valjean stands up and says, no, I'm the guy who you're looking for. Do you know what scene I'm talking about?
I've never really.
Who am I?
Yes. The Who Am I scene from the musical. The book is like, oh, his hair, like, suddenly turns white and he looks like 20 years older, and it's because the moral strain of that situation, like, aged him. Like, that's, like, a pretty common belief.
Okay,
Right.
well, that helps that helps me better understand why no one thought it was weird that babyface Michael Cera of the 1800s was just flouncing around doing opium.
Yeah, he's a real,
having a lot of sex.
He's a real Keanu Reeves. He doesn't age.
He's breathtaking.
Keanu Reeves got to 40 and then he just stopped. And not even 40, like 30, 25, 30, and then he just stopped aging.
Yeah, have you seen those memes of, like,
that old school, that portrait?
Pictures him 20 years ago, and it's like, he looks basically the same age, but he has a beard now.
There's also, like, somebody has a portrait of, like, an old relative that just looks exactly like Keanu Reeves.
From, like, the 1600s all the way to now. There are, like, random portraits and random pictures.
Yeah.
It just looks like Keanu Reeves now.
Keanu Reeves is a vampire.
If Keanu Reeves wants to turn me into a vampire, LiteraryAFPod at Gmail, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we'd all be open to that, honestly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, time skip.
Okay.
There's like 5 pages of just things that Dorian Gray bought in the last 18 years.
Yeah, I think, crap, I can't remember what the thing was I was supposed to say. The idea that I stole from Arlene.
Yeah,
it's like the personification of consumerism.
A bold statement about the consumerism of the times, where Oscar Wilde thought that it would be important to include this as kind of a tongue-in-cheek statement. Anyway, you know what? I said it better.
Thank you, Arlene, for sharing my idea that I thought of.
Oh, you're welcome.
Impromptu idea that was not discussed already.
I am your mouthpiece.
Thank you.
And then, there's Basil is leaving town. Is that what happens immediately after? Yeah, Basil's leaving town. He's going to Paris to do art.
Be an art man.
And I forget why they got into a fight.
Because of all the rumors about Dorian's actions.
And yes, and then Dorian gets angry at him and wants to. He's throwing it in his face like, you're the cause of all my problems and I'll show you. and
he takes him up to the picture, which he's been keeping in like an old classroom on the top floor of his house.
Yeah.
And he takes Basil up there, and then he like stabs him to death.
Yes.
It's because Basil tries to make him repent for his bad deeds.
And because he's so horrified by the portrait.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that Dorian can't bear it.
It's been driving him nuts for the last 18 years, basically.
Yeah.
And then he kills Basil, and then he calls in his old friend, whose name I forget.
Alan Campbell, I believe?
Something like that. And it's implied that they have like a history together.
A history.
And he brings in his friend, and he's like, you need to get rid of this body, or else I'm going to tell them about something.
They never tell you his secret either.
I assume it's their
really,
quote-unquote history.
I was really disappointed by the fact that you never got to know, though. Oscar
was,
Wilde, please.
I assume it was sex.
Yeah,
I hope,
it's the same secret that Oscar Wilde kept for most of his life.
Yes.
I mean, that seems the most sense. You know. It's sometimes you just want things confirmed. I understand. I understand. It was the 1800s.
Yeah,
I know what happened here.
you can write that in the book.
It's fine. He can't. Yep. Nope.
And we fudged.
He has this guy come over, and he blackmails essentially him into getting rid of this body, and he does, and then he leaves.
So I don't know. In the summary, it says that before that happens, he runs into Sybil's brother.
Yes.
Was that before that?
According to this,
I thought it happened after.
He runs into Sybil's brother more than once. There's
he does.
The
There's
first
a couple
altercation
encounters.
when he runs away to go to an opium den.
Yeah, I thought that was after he killed Basil, but
it is after he killed Basil, but before he dealt with the body.
Yes.
Oh.
The body was up there for days before he actually did anything about it.
He does run into Sybil's brother, who identifies him because somebody else called him Prince Charming, which is what Sybil's nickname for him had been. Which is a crazy thing to remember after 18 years, honestly. Yeah. And in 18 years, there have been so many Prince Charmings. That's a big jump to make. But
actually, in Britain, people were very non-charming.
And and he actually lets him go because Dorian looks so young.
Oh yeah, he says like, I'm only 20. I can't be this 40-year-old man that you think I am.
Exactly.
and then the brother lets him go, and then he does the blackmail to get rid of the body.
And the brother starts following Dorian.
Yeah, because somebody else is like, oh, that's Dorian Gray or whatever. He's not 20. He's like 40.
Yeah.
Even though he's hot and young. But see, this is
real Clooney.
Like, there are periods of this book where I read it like really intensely, like it was really cool.
Yeah.
And then it just got dull, and then I just started to skim.
Yep.
And this is one of the sections that I started to skim, because after the brother goes away, he ends up reflecting about the picture, and then he goes to a hunt.
Yes, he goes to a party, kind of, where, people are hunting, and he's not, and...
He's paranoid about the brother finding him.
Yes.
And then they go on a hunt. And then somebody fires the gun, and there's, like, a yelp from one of the bushes ahead of them.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, why was there an idiot in the bush in front of us? And the guy in the bush dies, and Dorian Gray, like, takes off. And then he finds out after that it was just some random sailor who was lurking in the bushes that got shot. And then Dorian Gray rushes off to go see the body, and it turns out it was the body of Sybil's brother.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then...
and then from there, he feels relieved.
Yeah.
And he's kind of... He basically feels like he got away scot-free now.
Yeah.
He's been vilified, he's fine. And I believe after that, it's just he goes home.
Well, according to this, and I kind of remember this, he resolves to amend his life. Like, he wants to... He wants to become better now, like, after he feels like he's safe, he feels like he's gotten away with everything.
Yeah.
And he wants to, like, become a better person and confess his crimes, but he doesn't have the courage.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then the painting changes again to...
It has, like, blood on its hands.
Yeah.
And by now it's, like, old and ragged, and it's got blood, and it's, like, got a messed up face.
It looks like a monster.
It looks like a monster. And he just goes up to his picture room, right?
Yep.
And then tries to stab the picture.
Yeah, he apparently, according to this, I can't remember how much of this is actually in the book or if it's subtext or whatever, but the painting begins to reveal his hypocrisy and that's the last straw that he can't handle.
Yes.
And so he starts stabbing the painting and
Stabs himself and...
Yeah.
Well, no, the painting is unharmed. His body is discovered and it has been stabbed.
Yeah.
So.
Essentially, what happens in the beginning of the book, which was my, like, immediately upon 10 pages in, I was like, okay, I know what's happening. But basically, the Dorian and the painting, by the end, we're going to switch places. And that's exactly what happens, where the painting is as he had entreated the Lord to, like, let the painting bear his sins, and then his final sin of essentially killing himself. Now, that's it. And the spell, quote unquote, is broken, the painting restored, and Dorian bears the weight of his sins and death.
Yeah, I kind of see the painting as, like, his soul. And so, at the end of, like, when he can't stand the crimes that he's done, he tries to, like, essentially kill off his own soul, and that kills him.
Yeah.
But it's, okay, let's talk about it. Danny, how about you talk first? Because I know you loved it.
I did not like this book at all. I read it in one afternoon. It was just...
I feel like that might have been your problem.
I do too. I think you read it too fast. I think
I read it fast because I wanted it to be done.
Yes.
I just wanted to get it out of the way because, like, it drones on, and there's bits of story in this that I like. There are sections that are good, and, like, there are things that happen that are interesting, but for every, like, cool or interesting thing, there's, like, 12 pages of just droning on and on. Like, for example, there's the 18-year time skip, and then you have the next 4 or 5 pages of just, this is what Dorian Gray bought in the last 18 years. Like, that just, it was too much. And
I think that was the worst offender, at least, of that, where it droned on for, I would say, like, just way too long. I will agree that, especially when we start talking about Lord Henry, and then later on Dorian, the way they speak is so excessive. Like, these guys are extra on a level that I can't understand. I think that's just flowery prose as it is, but it made it no less difficult to read sometimes because I'm trying to read what they're saying and make sense of it the way they're saying it, but they're really just repeating themselves over and over and over again and making different metaphors for the same thing constantly. So I can at least understand where you're coming from there.
Yeah, basically. And I, like, the only okay character, I guess, was Basil,
Mm-hmm.
and he was gone after the first chapter and, like, the second to last chapter, basically, or the last section of the book. He was replaced with Lord Henry, who is dumb, and I think, like, when he talks about his wife, he's just like, when you get married, you know your schedule, and you know when to not be home because your wife is home, kind of thing, which is just irritating. And I don't know.
I think that was also kind of a tongue-in-cheek, this man gay kind of thing, where you could really say it, where he was not interested in being married to a woman. He was married for appearances.
Who? Which one?
Lord Henry.
Oh.
I think that was what that was about, mostly, with his opinion about being married to a lady and how much that sucks for every reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else?
It was like, I already knew the part about the picture changing because it's an old story and people have referred to it a lot, but the other parts of this were just, like, predictable, I guess. I was not a surprise when Sybil killed herself. The foreshadowing with her brother was like a big neon sign that is like, this guy's gonna come back and try to kill Dorian Gray because he messed up Sybil.
Yeah.
And the only thing that surprised me at all, and it was still not a huge surprise, was just Basil getting killed. Like, right at the start of the second half of the book.
Yeah.
Aside from that, everything was like, well, I know what's going to happen here. I know what's going to happen there. So,
I feel that might be another consequence of reading it all in one day, though. Because if you're reading it, like, over a period of time, and you kind of forget some of those details until it happens again, then you're like, oh, yeah, I remember this guy.
I don't know about that, actually.
Because I don't think I remembered the brother at all until he showed up again.
But, like, it's 150 pages. That's, 2 hours of your time to read. I'm not going to spread that out over a week.
It took me a long time to read it. I read it over 3 or 4 days. And the reason it took me so long is because of the way it was written. And because I kept getting mad. And I think that, I didn't know what this book was about when I first went into it. I will be the first to admit that I don't have a great knowledge of classic lit at all. I've read maybe 2 or 3 of the classics, and and 2 of them were for high school.
Oh, what a shame.
I'm sorry, Sheldon. I'm disappointing you. But I really wanted to get as much of this as I could, because I think when you're reading a book like this, it's not about the plot, it's how you get there. It's about the things that they're saying between the plot events as much as it is about the plot events.
See, the things that they were saying between the plot events were the parts that I hated.
I agree with you, but I think we hated them for different reasons. I hated them because Dorian started out as, I would say, innocent and impressionable, and very quickly became insufferably arrogant and just full of himself in a way that Lord Henry definitely was, and I'm not going to say he wasn't, because he is the pinnacle of narcissism, but he always seems to do it in a way that is not... he doesn't have contempt for people so much as he has disinterest. Where it's if it's not entertaining him, he's like, eh. Versus where Dorian is kind of a dick.
I feel like Dorian at the beginning is essentially a child that has no, that he's kind of pure and innocent, but he has no, real leaning either way or the other, and that it's Lord Henry's speech at the beginning that kind of sets him off on this, path of narcissism, where it's your beauty is fading, your youth is fading, enjoy it now. Just live for pleasure now, because you have no... in the future, everything's going to be bad.
Yeah.
So then it sets Dorian off on this path of, pure narcissism and pure hedonism. And then it really wrestles with, ideas of, morality and, I think it has, a lot to say about society of that time and, what the upper class and what the, I can't remember what the term for it is. It's, the kind of, the foppish men, the dandies, I guess.
Yeah, that dandyism, I think, is a whole is what that is.
Yeah, and, just, the idea of, this is what these guys are like in the upper class. This is, they're young and they're handsome and they're rich and they think they can get away with anything. And I think Dorian Gray really speaks to that whole thing. So, I feel like a part of it, we would have probably liked it better if we had read it back in 150 years ago or whatever. So that's on us, I guess.
Our bad.
But no, and I also, and one thing I do think about why with older books I kind of like to read them a little slower is because I think when there's a lot of subtext and a lot of context that we're missing, it's helpful to just kind of work through it a little bit slower to try to figure out what they're saying. I tried to barrel through Ulysses when I read that book.
Oof.
By Joyce, and that was the book that taught me how to read slower, because up to that point I was Mr. Speed Read, Mr. oh yeah, I know what happens in this book, I read it yesterday, or I read it in an afternoon, and then I read Ulysses and I couldn't do more than 20 pages at a time because it's just so challenging and so slow, and so things happen that don't make any sense, or the total format of the book changes from chapter to chapter, but after reading that, I really like learned how to like slow down and like, okay, what are they saying in this paragraph, or like what's different here. And
See, if I had spread Dorian Gray out over a couple days, I would have not read it at all. Because for me, reading is a fun activity. Like, I do it to enjoy myself. I want to enjoy what I'm reading. I want to have a good time. If I'm going to sit and do something for 3 hours, I want to not waste that time. And Dorian Gray felt like a waste of time.
But if something is not fun, but it's like you learn something from it, or it like helps you enrich you as a person, would you still consider that like a waste of time?
I don't read those kind of books. For me, like, reading a book is like sitting down to watch a movie. Yeah. Or watch, it's like binge watching a TV show. And if I spend 3 days on something that I don't come out of feeling good, it feels like it was a waste. Like, I could have been doing something to make me happy, not be miserable.
I feel almost the opposite of that, where if I spend 3 days doing something that, like, it's okay, but I don't, like, I come out of it not as a better person, or not as, like, you know, or I don't feel smarter, or I don't feel challenged or whatever, then I'm just kind of like, why did I waste my time doing that?
I think, like, I'm in the middle of you two on this, because I also read for fun, but I love being emotionally affected by anything that I'm reading. So when I said that I liked Dorian Gray, like the book, I did not enjoy reading it as much as I enjoyed being upset by it. It did not teach me much about, like, I guess the underlying message in the book. I understood it. Do I think it's valuable in my daily life? Not really. Do I understand more about Oscar Wilde and the period he was living in and what he had to deal with? Absolutely. Because this is written to be in the same period where he was living, so I'm imagining him treating the characters, like the main three, Dorian, Lord Henry, and Basil, as, like, guys that either he knew, or general attitudes of the time, just reflections, I should say, of the society that he was in. So I can appreciate that, but would I read this book again for pleasure? No, I would not. I don't think I'll ever pick this book up again. Do I want to have it on my shelf? Absolutely. Am I glad that I read it? Yes. Did I like reading it? No.
It's like when you're in high school and you have assigned reading. This to me felt like it was a project that I had to complete for homework. And like, I never read the books I was supposed to read in high school. I skimmed through the last couple chapters of Fahrenheit 451. I didn't read Of Mice and Men. I read...
Oh, Mice and Men's good.
Well, for one, when we read books in high school, we ended up watching the movie anyway, so there was no point in actually reading the books, so... But I didn't read the books. Instead, I read, like, stuff that I wanted to read. That's how I always felt about, like, reading stuff. Is I'm just going to read what I want to read because I know it's going to be a good time. Dorian Gray was not a good time.
I don't know if Dorian Gray's I don't know if I would consider it a fun read.
No.
But it's definitely, like, a book that I look back on fondly, and I like the story of it. And I like the morality stuff going on, and I like the, like, subtext and, like, ideas at play. I
would have liked this better if it was written differently.
I think that's true. I think if it was written more as if it was actually written as a supernatural thriller type book now, I think it would have been extremely exciting.
It wouldn't have to be written like a modern thriller book. It just cut out like a third of the prose, maybe add in a little more character interaction. That's not Lord Henry, basically.
Are you saying you would have liked an abridged version of this better?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. If you cut out all the in-between, I would have enjoyed this way more.
Your idea of turning this into like a modern supernatural thriller, to me, is just like, I just imagine like all the like cliche of the stuff, but it's like the Dorian Gray like plot, but it's like the like an episode of Supernatural.
That's exactly where I went to. It's probably like an episode of Supernatural or the X-Files or something.
Yeah, see, that would
Dean
be...
and Sam are like, we gotta shoot the painting.
That would be
Throw the salt on the floor or whatever. I don't remember this show.
the gif of Dorian Gray.
GIF.
And with that, I think we're super.
Do not bring that in this house. You're gonna leave right away if you call it a GIF.
All right, so it's time for us to leave in a GIF.
No.
A Jiffy.
A Jiffy.
Okay, so anyway, you can find us
Giphy.
on internet and website.
LiteraryAFPod@gmail.com is our email. You can find us on Facebook, Literary AF. We're also on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and Podbean, Literary AF. You can find me on Twitter, LiteraryAFPod, same as Instagram, LiteraryAFPod. I think that's our plugs, unless you have plugs.
You can find me on Twitter at Arlene.
Oh, just that Arlene.
Just Arlene.
Just Arlene.
I got it early, and
it shows my name apparently. Sheldon with that foreshadowing.
Yep. And you can find me on 4chan as anonymous user.
Oh, good.
Keanu will be waiting.
Yeah. And okay, so next week we're going to talk about.
Next week, Arlene and I are going to be talking about Peter Darling by Austin Chant.
Okay, and the week after that, you guys talking about?
We're not sure yet. I'll put it in the show notes though, because by then we'll have decided.
Great. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, and tune in next time when we talk about different books.
Other books.